On this super live review, we're going to take a look at the Sennheiser HD560S. This is a headphone that's got kind of a lot of hype around it right now, and I think with pretty good reason. So it's a new Sennheiser headphone, which it doesn't happen all the time. So that's good, and people have pretty good, expectations of a Sennheiser headphone. But I think even more to the point, just this got a little bit of early hype from some first reviewers comparing this thing kind of favorably to some other similarly priced Sennheisers. So the headphones that, well, actually, let me go ahead and talk about this one first. The HD560S, this is a $200 headphone. So not super expensive if you're, into the audio scene, but not super budget either, right? It's kind of like in a pretty good spot where you got competition from Sennheiser themselves, including things like the Sennheiser HD58X and the Sennheiser HD6XX, which kind of priced on either side of this thing, and they're generally regarded as some of the best headphones in this price range. So it was interesting that Sennheiser came out with their own kind of competitor to their own headphones, but that's what we've got here. So yeah, 200 bucks, it's an open back headphone, fits like this. And I've spent the past couple of weeks living with this thing and comparing it to some other headphones that I've got that I think are pretty similar. I don't have the 6XX, but I have spent quite a bit of time with it. However, what I do have the Sennheiser HD600s, as well as the Sennheiser HD58X. And I also spent a little bit of time comparing this to the Philips Fidelio X2, because I think that also kind of comes in this like sub $200 price range. So of all those headphones, which one is the best? Well, that's what this review is for. So we're going to get into that. This is, FYI, a live review. And if you're watching live, if you've got any questions about either the Sennheiser HD560S or any of the other headphones that I talk about here, well, leave those questions in the live chat. And at the end of this review, we're going to have a little bit of a Q&A section, a little back and forth chat. If you're catching this as a VOD and it's not live, well, unfortunately you missed out on the Q&A. If you want to be part of the next Q&A, please subscribe to the channel, ding the bell, and YouTube will let you know when I'm live next time, and then we can chat. One other thing to call out too, I've had a couple of people mention that they like my shirt, so if you are interested in getting a high-res placebo t-shirt, I actually do have a merch store open with a link in the pinned comment down below if you're interested in checking out this shirt. But if not, if you're just here for the review of the Sennheiser HD560S, well, let's go ahead and get started. And here we go. I'm not gonna spin these things. Not that they're delicate, but, well, let's, like I mentioned, we're gonna start by talking about the build, the physical aspects of this headphone. And we'll just start off by talking about the things that came in the box, which is what you're seeing here. This is everything that came in the box of the 560S. Obviously, you get the headphone. It's got pads pre-installed. It's got a headband pad. You're not surprised by that. You're probably not surprised by this stuff either, but you do get a very, very long cable. This is a 10-foot long cable, and it is, well, let's go ahead and punch in on this thing. This is just, a pretty typical silicone cable, slightly on the thick side, but not too thick at all. I don't know, pretty basic cable, but it's got a couple of issues, at least in my opinion. So issue number one is it's 10 foot long. And I don't know about you, I don't have like a high-res system or a hi-fi system at home with a lazy boy chair that's 8 feet away from that. So 10 feet long, I don't need this. In fact, I actually went out and ordered a separate replacement cable. This is like a little 4-foot cable. Maybe we'll talk a little bit more about that later. But anyway, I don't like how long this cable is. The other thing I don't really like about this cable is it's got this just, this beefy 6.3 millimeter quarter-inch quarter-inch adapter. I don't know which word I just said there. But, I'm primarily listening to these things on portable devices. And so this is not ideal. Obviously, most headphones, or a lot of headphones, will come with a quarter-inch adapter like this, but usually I like the ones that have like a screw off. Unfortunately here, Sennheiser instead supplies this pigtail, which this is just, for a portable setup right here, right? This is what you are gonna have to use for listening to this thing portably. In my opinion, not the most convenient. So that's why I went out and got this. This is just, this is actually a Sennheiser official cable. Let's see if we can punch in and prove to you, not that you care, but there you go, there's your Sennheiser logo. So this is just a little 4 foot cable, 1.2 meter, pretty typical silicone cable that Sennheiser actually includes in some of their other HD 500 series headphones. Unfortunately, they don't include it here with the 560S, so that was a bit of a bummer. But if you're curious, can you use cables from other HD 560 series headphones? The answer is yes. And just kind of, you know, take a look and make sure that you're getting one that's got an adapter similar to this. At least, so I tried one here. Obviously, it's got the 4-pole 2.5 millimeter connector, same as the cable that came with my 560S. But I have heard, from what I understand, you can also get these in a 3-pole variant that also works with other Sennheiser HD 500 headphones. I don't have those to test, but I'm pretty confident those will work here as well on the 560S. Maybe one other thing about the cable worth talking about before I throw this away is that you do have, well, one, it's just single-sided entry. There's not cables coming out of either end of the headphone, and I kind of like that initially, but yeah, I used to have a problem with headphones that had cables coming out of both sides of them. It just seemed like a little bit more convenient and a little bit sleeker to have it going into one side of it, but now I actually don't really care too much. Maybe that's just because I've got too much audio gear, but one thing that is nice is that you've got this 2.5 millimeter connector with this like locking mechanism. So you stick it in there, you twist it, and now it's in place, and that thing's not going to pop out by accident, which seems like a good thing. So that's the accessories package, and I'm going to move this cable out of the way because, man, it's big. And we'll just focus here on the headphone itself, which I think, and let's go and go back to this cam, I think this is a really nice looking headphone. Do you agree? I mean, I'm gonna put it on my head, and I know my head's not the most nice looking head to see them on, but I think it's just a very nice looking headphone generally. I like the all black motif. You got this blacked out grill with the subtle but I think tasteful Sennheiser logo. The headband also mostly matte black, but over here again you do have that subtle but tasteful Sennheiser branding. So I think they did a really good job with this headphone. So, I mean, this is basically the same chassis and design that you'll see on a number of other Sennheiser HD 500 series headphones. But I think of all the ones that I've seen, this one, in my opinion, is the best looking. Of course, aesthetic isn't just, it's not the only thing that people care about, maybe not even the most important thing, but I do think that it is. It's certainly a thing that I care about, if I'm honest. But maybe even more important is how this thing feels in the head and what comfort is like. And I actually found it to be generally a very comfortable headphone. Let's go back to this cam, and I'll just kind of describe wearing it. You know, it fits over ear, fairly large ear cups that do completely encompass my ears. I don't have any issues with my ears either touching the front or the backs or the top and the bottom of the ear cup, so that much is nice. The depth of the ear cups is pretty reasonable. Generally, they fit my ears pretty well. I will call out, and I've talked about this during my initial unboxing video. Let's see if we can show it to you. It's a little bit hard to get on camera, but there is this little protrusion back here in the back of the ear cup on either ear cup, both the left and the right sides. And I do actually feel that a little bit on the back of my ear. I was a little bit worried about it when I first unboxed this thing and put it on my head. The good news is that I just kind of learned to ignore it. Like, I just became completely numb to the fact that it was touching my ear. So if you're very particular about things touching your ear, just consider that might be an issue for you. For me, I noticed it initially, but totally forgot about it after about an hour of listening to it. And it's at the point now where it didn't bother me at all. So generally pretty happy with the comfort. Build materials and stuff, and I think are also, pretty solid here on the 560S. It's, a $200 headphone, so it's not made of the most premium materials. There's not a lot of metal on this. You've got like the metal grills over here, but otherwise I think even the band itself is made out of plastic. There might be some metal in there somewhere, but for the most part it's a plastic headphone, fairly lightweight. It doesn't feel premium as necessarily, but it also, I don't think it feels too cheap, and it definitely doesn't feel undurable. It feels like a durable headphone. Is undurable a word? I don't think so. But it feels pretty durable. So generally, pretty happy here with the build of the 560S. And I will pull in the HD 5.8X just for kind of a size comparison. You can see the ear cup size, roughly the same. The outer grill here on the 5.8X, a little bit larger. But ear cup wise, and I think even honestly like depth wise in terms of how it fits in my head, let's go ahead and throw this thing in my head. You know, this thing fits a little bit larger, but ear cup wise, it's kind of indecipherable or indiscernible, at least to my head. So generally, I mean, this is known for being a pretty well fitting headphone, maybe known for having a little bit of a strong clamp force. And that's somewhat true here of the 560S as well, but I didn't have any issues with that at all. You know, it's maybe one thing worth calling out is that the larger you make this thing, so the larger your head, the more sort of inward pressure you do get on the cups, right? If I have it at its smallest size, that's where you're gonna have the least amount of clamp force. So if you got a small head, you're in luck. If you got a larger head, well, you're gonna have to break that in, but wow, that is actually pretty firm. My head's not quite that large, so I didn't have that many issues here with the clamp force and the comfort. So there you go. I mean, that's about as much as I can tell you about the build of the 560S. Generally pretty happy with it. So that should lead us into talking about sound signature, sound quality of the 560S. And like I mentioned at the top of this review, I spent a lot of time comparing it to my Sennheiser HD600s, as well as the HD58X. There's a lot of numbers, and I apologize if I get messed up. I imagine you will too, but those are kind of the main headphones that I was comparing it to. And I think this thing stands out on its own versus those two other headphones. I'm not ready to tell you which one I think is the best at this point, but I think that this does stand out on its own. Like it's got its own thing going. So just generally, tonally wise, I would describe the HD 560S as kind of a bright neutral sound signature, which might sound boring, but I don't think this headphone's boring at all. Yeah, I think bright neutral kind of describes it pretty well though, where the bass is actually surprisingly linear. And we'll get into describing the bass a little bit more, but I think of these three headphones, the bass on the HD 560S is the best. And it's not that there's a lot of bass. There's not like necessarily a lot of bass emphasis there. It's just relatively linear with the lower mid-range. Again, kind of that overall tonality. It's got sort of a strong sense of clarity, sort of a transparency, maybe a little bit on the thin sounding side. But I mean, that's kind of what you would expect with a bright neutral headphone, and that's what I think we got here with the 560S. Let's go ahead and go to the table and talk a little bit more specifically about the sound though, all right? So that's just kind of like the general signature, bright, neutral. That's what we're working with, but let's talk about specifically the bass. And like I mentioned in talking about the tonality, the bass here is just not especially forward, but it is very, very, very linear and very well extended. I think, you know, take here, my Sennheiser HD600s. This is like my favorite headphone. It is not a bassy headphone. In fact, the bass is pretty known for rolling off. And I found that the bass here on the 560S extended better than it does on the other headphone, right? Here, this is a $300 headphone, maybe a $400 headphone, depending on where you buy it. $200 headphone, I think the bass is better extended here. I mean, there's zero bleeding. Like I mentioned, it's not like an emphasized boomy bass at all. It's just really flat and it's got a nice impact. It hits with pretty strong authority without, again, I think being like a bass cannon or anything like that. If you're looking for a bass cannon, that's not this headphone. But if you're looking for a headphone that's got really nice bass, really well defined, and just, you know, it extends well through the mid bass and even into the sub bass, I think you'll actually be pretty happy here with the 560S. And then we can talk a little bit about the mid-range, which I kind of described as a bit on the thin side, right? So this is kind of a cool analytical sounding headphone. The lower mid-range is maybe a little bit on the thin side, you know, and that's one thing that, you know, the Sennheiser, this series, right? The 58X and the 600 and the 6XX are all kind of known for having a bit of a thick, warm mid-range, and that's kind of the opposite of what you get here on the 560S. It's a little bit more on the cool side, a little bit more clinical, analytical, and thin sounding, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. It's just kind of a different take on neutral. But that's kind of what you get here. You know, vocals are still forward. There is still some upper mid-range emphasis here, but yeah, otherwise, just like the lower mid-range just doesn't have that fullness to it that you get on some other headphones, which leads this to being just like a strong, again, clear, transparent sounding set. And then we get to the treble, which similarly to the upper mid-range is also a little bit on the forward side. I would say it's not like an especially bright sounding headphone, even though I described it as a bright neutral. There's a little bit of treble emphasis, but that brightness I think comes more from the thinness in the lower mid-range. But in the treble, you do get a little bit of forwardness. You get a pretty decent air to it. I had zero issues with sibilance here on the 560S, which is great. But I do think that the treble is still probably the weakest part of this headphone. Bass is exemplary. Mid-range is solid. Maybe a little bit lacking in the texture, but the mid-range is solid. The treble, I think, is pretty decent. But it can get a little bit on, I guess gritty is the word that I want to use. Gritty seems like a really harsh word to use because it's not bad treble. It's just when you're comparing it to the other headphones that I've been talking about, and especially just the promise that this headphone gives at this $200 price range, I do think that the treble is kind of where it is let down just a little bit. It's just a little bit, like I mentioned, a little bit gritty, a little bit coarse, kind of I wouldn't say that it's fatiguing treble necessarily. Like, again, it's not that far forward. It's just got like a character to the treble quality that, I don't know, it's not as pleasant as some other headphones can be. So, I mean, yeah, I guess I'll just leave it there at that. Other things worth talking about though, besides just the tonality, I think that imaging and soundstage, the HD 560S actually does surprisingly well. So again, bringing in my favorite pair of headphones, the HD 600s, not especially well known for their imaging and soundstage. Actually, I think they do imaging fairly well, but soundstage, not a strength. Over here on the 560S, I don't think that these things stage especially massive. Like I mentioned, I did do some comparisons with this and the Fidelio X2s, and I found that the Fidelio X2 just kind of obviously had a bigger soundstage to it, but I did find that the definition and the sort of the audio image positioning and stuff, I found actually stronger here on the 560S than it is on the 600s. Sort of kind of an obvious advantage too, frankly, and pretty impressive for a $200 set. Was there anything else I wanted to talk about? Let's see. I mean, detail-wise, these things are pretty solid. Again, like the treble, I think the treble is relatively well detailed, even if it's a little bit coarse. The mid-range is probably where the detail is the weakest. Not that it's necessarily poor detail in the mid-range, it's just that I happen to be comparing it to my favorite headphone, which has just excellent mid-range detail. And then the bass, I found that the bass was generally the detail and the definition of that bass just allowed the notes to come through really cleanly. And yeah, detail just generally in the bass and the treble pretty good, mid-range not quite as solid. So maybe we can get into a little bit more of these direct comparisons. And so here I've brought in the Sennheiser HD 58X. Pricing wise, I believe Drop sells this thing for about $170, so a little bit cheaper than this, but it's on Drop, which, you know, means that you gotta wait for it, and there's other downsides to buying on Drop, whereas this set ostensibly is gonna be available on Amazon someday, and you'll be able to get it the next day. So what can we say about these things? So overall, the sound here on the 58X is just a lot warmer, and just kind of like a thicker sound generally to the thinner, I think, airier, more spacious sound that you get here on the 560S. Which of those descriptions is better? I think honestly depends on your personal preferences. My personal preferences, I generally tend to prefer an airy, open sound, and so just tonally wise, I prefer the HD 560S. There's maybe a little bit more mid-bass emphasis here on the 58X, but generally the bass I just don't think is nearly as well done as the bass is here on the 560S. It's just a little bit on the mushy side, in my opinion, here on the 560S. I do think that the mid-range here is pretty well done, and maybe there is a little bit of advantage to the mid-range warmth and texture here on this set versus this set, but generally I just kind of find the 5.8X to be a little bit too warm for my liking. I think also maybe worth calling out too is that the treble here is very, very relaxed. If you are at all allergic to treble, you're not going to have issues here on the 5.8X, whereas you might have issues here on the 560S. This is just a little bit, quite a bit more aggressive in the treble, and again, the treble character can be a little bit on the gritty, coarse side here. Whereas here, it's smooth treble, but it's not especially well-detailed treble. So yeah, I think the 5.8X is a pretty nice set. I really like the form factor of this headphone at this price range. Between these two, I actually prefer the form here of the 5.8X, but I think if I were to be spending my own money, personally, I would spend the extra 30 bucks and get the 560S. However, does that hold true for the Sennheiser HD600, which, if I haven't said it enough times already today, this is my favorite headphone. I mean, of all the headphones that I own, this is definitely my favorite headphone, and probably of all the headphones I have heard, and I've heard more expensive headphones, this is just such an easy default. Really, really strong mid-range, decent enough bass, definitely not known for its bass, but it's pretty decent bass, and I just don't happen to be a big bass guy. So for me, the bass in here is actually perfectly fine. And then treble is just smooth for days. Was that sensual enough? I think that just the mid-range and the treble presentation here on the HD600 is why I keep coming back to that headphone. And versus the 560S, well, I think there are some advantages to this headphone, frankly. But generally, I still do prefer the 600. So the advantages here, kind of already described them, but the imaging and the just like the audio separation and how clean everything is, sounds, you know, it's just more defined here. There's more clarity in the sound. And then again, I think also soundstage and the sensation that the sound is coming from a little bit outside your head rather than directly on top of your head, I think is better done here on the 560S. That said, soundstage I think is a little bit overrated as a quality. So for some people, I think they're going to gravitate toward this headphone because of those reasons. And again, I think also the bass here on the 560S is significantly better than the bass here. Not just that that there's more bass than there is on the 600s, which I think there is. There's a little bit more bass here, just that I think it extends better into the sub-bass frequencies here than it does here. But on top of that, I think just generally the bass just comes across more defined and punchier and more exciting. Whereas here, the bass is there, it's supportive, and this is, again, just, it's not a headphone for a bass head, which for me is totally fine. For you, it might not be. So yeah, again, between these two headphones, my personal preference is still gonna be the HD600s. Sorry, 560S. Sorry, HD560S, but I do think that this thing does a pretty good job for, again, $200 versus, this is a $300 set. If you're trying to decide between these two, I think I would first decide on sort of those tonal characteristics and which one of those sounds more appealing to you. And at that point, if the tonal characteristics of the HD600 sound more appealing to you, I do think it is worth the extra $100. If you're not sure, I think this is an easier headphone to recommend, the HD560S, not just because it's $100 cheaper, but because I think that bass presentation is a lot stronger here. I think this is gonna work also with more music, right? The HD600, this thing really shines with really, really good quality recordings, really rich sound where you can extract all the detail from the mid-range. This thing, it can do that as well. But it also, I think, plays better with, you know, some recordings that maybe aren't quite as nice. So as kind of like a starter entry-level audiophile headphone, I think the HD560S is actually a pretty good option. So that is my review of the Sennheiser HD560S. I guess I should give this thing a score, huh? I mean, I just described it. I said a lot of good things about it, and I think out of 5 stars, I'm gonna go ahead and give it 4. Do I love this headphone? I don't know that I love this headphone. I really like this headphone. And in fact, I like it enough that I went and ordered another cable to replace that other shorter cable because I don't like how springy that cable is. Because I think this is a headphone that I'm going to go back to pretty often. It's just such a nice compact form factor. That single-sided entry cable just makes it really, I don't know, there's like this unencumbered feeling you have wearing a headphone this compact and simple, and I like that. The build quality in this thing is maybe not the most premium, but at 200 bucks, I think this thing is pretty competitive. Yeah, I don't know. It's a good set. And then sound quality wise, I just got done describing a lot of it. I think this thing does a lot right. That imaging, really excellent. The bass presentation, really excellent. Again, don't get it twisted. This is not a bassy headphone, but the bass that's done on here is actually really, really well done. And then you just get that bright neutral tonality, which I think suits a lot of recordings, frankly. You know, I had a lot of time, or I had a lot of fun listening to things like Fleetwood Mac, some older stuff. What else was I listening to? I had a bunch of stuff. Some jazz, Hiroshi Suzuki, a lot of Cure, Depeche Mode, Erasure, stuff like that. And it all sounded very, very solid here on the 560S. So that is this headphone. If you're interested in checking this thing out, of course, I've got a link in the description down below. I think it's actually not on Amazon as of this recording because it sounds like they've actually got a little bit of a shortage going on. But if you're watching this after this shortage, and that shortage will end, check out the links in the description down below. If you like this video, if you found it helpful, found it informative, you just want to be a nice person, go ahead and hit the like button. You can subscribe to the channel if you want to be a part of next super reviews. Actually ding that bell. Make sure you ding that bell and the YouTube will let you know when I'm live next. If you're watching this and you're not live, thank you guys for tuning in. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next super review. If you're live, however, let's have a little conversation.